Hello and welcome to this webinar where we conclude section 4.1 of part A of module 4. My name's Courtney and here we're looking mainly at diversity but also remuneration and financials to help achieve corporate governance success. So governance success factors, we've previously talked about boards and structuring boards properly, but now we want to look at diversity. And I want you to take a moment to look at this graph. In 2009, 8% roughly of people on boards were women on the ASX 200, so the largest 200 listed companies in Australia. 8%, less than 1 in 10. But what we see is this slow movement up to 2016 and then nearly a quarter, 22.7%. Where has that moved to now? Well, by the time we get to the end of 2021, which is when the data ends, we are nearly at 35%, more than 1 in 3, from previously less than 1 in 10, nearly 1 in 12. So we have seen a huge shift in this gender balance on our boards of directors. So I just want to show you some data because I've been discussing gender diversity on boards since, well, on behalf of CPA since about 2007, 2008. And in this teaching ethics and governance as part of guided learning since 2015. So when I first started discussing this in 2015, there were 31 companies on the ASX 200 that had no women. 31 out of 200 of the biggest companies had no women. By 2016, that had improved to 21 companies. By the 31st of December 2019, there were still 6. But what was happening, you can see they actually had their names published. Now, when you get your name published and you're held up to be someone who is well behind the times, social pressure starts making a difference. And what we see now, this idea, 34.2% as of 2021, and hopefully we see some new statistics updated soon. New appointments, 42%. So nearly 1 in 2 appointments to the board are women. This is an extraordinary change. So why did it happen? How did it happen? Did it just naturally evolve? Absolutely not. So we have the Australian Stock Exchange, Securities Exchange now, corporate governance principles and recommendations. And number 1 talks about solid foundations for management and oversight. So you need to structure the board effectively. Now, it was only a few years ago in one of the later editions where they said, we actually should bring in some diversity. That's part of good structure. It previously wasn't there. So recommendation 1.5, you need a diversity policy. And going into more detail, you can see it. You need to have a diversity policy. Well, some companies were doing that, but not much more. And then measurable objectives about gender diversity and how you're working towards it. Then it has this extra requirement. If you're in the top 300 companies on the Australian Securities Exchange, you should have not less than 30% of the directors of each gender. So you can see that this requirement is slowly becoming formalized. It's not just being encouraged, but documented and locked in. Now, you don't have to do it because it's not the law. It's a recommendation, but it's a very strong recommendation. And with the ASX principles, if you don't comply, you need to explain why. So if you remember back to module 3, it's not exactly a rule, it's more of a principle. It's guidance because we want to encourage people to do good things. But if they don't, we say, give us a good reason why not. And it's very, very hard in this modern age to give a good reason why you can't appoint women to a board of directors. I've heard some terrible, women don't have experience in my industry. Women can't really do engineering. Women can't do this or that. It's extraordinary how just bafflingly wrong some of the logic has been used in the past. And I often heard, it's all about merit. We only choose the best. And so it was just men. But it's not merit when you look at the connections and the networks and the history of those people. And often the lack of competence, that wasn't it. It was just culturally normal to do that. And then things changed. So different countries do it differently. Australia, the United Kingdom, Malaysia had gone for and I use this story about the sunshine, using encouragement and warmth to make something happen rather than force, the north wind, if you remember the Aesop's fable I explained. But then you got the European Union and its mandatory quotas. So Norway, France, Spain also have that. And some people say, as soon as you bring in a quota, you just get these token people being appointed to meet the rule. And that's where rules can be helpful, because it's forcing this action as long as it's done properly. We don't want someone to just tick the box but not actually comply with the intent of what's going on. So to show you just how recent these changes are, yes, nearly 42% of women most recently have been appointed, as you know, every time there's board appointments, 42% have been women. But take a look at 2008, 2009. Only 8%, only 5%. So this was before any pressure was being put on, any encouragement. Without pressure, nothing changed. And then advocacy, pressure, shaming companies who weren't doing it started to happen. And you see this jump. All of a sudden, 1 in 5, nearly 1 in 4. Then it's nearly 1 in 3, 1 in 3, nearly 1 in 2. And what's happening is, it's not just, let's appoint some women and now we'll feel good about ourselves. The whole point is that diversity leads to better thinking, better problem solving, because you've got people approaching it with different life experience, different perspectives. You get much better analysis. You don't get groupthink. You don't get male hierarchy pecking order, which you might hear about. You get much more collaborative work. So yeah, this is an extraordinary transition. And you would think in 2008, 2009, we wouldn't have been so, let's call it so backward, but we were. Now, I've talked a lot about gender diversity, but there's a whole different groupings of diversity, from race, ethnicity, which kind of go together, gender, then sexual orientation, age, physical abilities, educational background, socioeconomic status, belief systems, whether they're religious or political. So we need to be very understanding that our normal tendency is to look for people just like us to join our tribe, because we feel safe around us. We think in a certain way, we solve problems in a particular way, we like to do things. We don't want someone to challenge us, make us do it different, hold us accountable. So the first thing we want to do right with diversity is to stop the discrimination. There were so many people who didn't get an opportunity when they were good enough just because of their gender or their race or their age or a physical impairment or a disability. An interesting thing happened with COVID, for example, because when people were working from home in a Teams meeting, they might not even have their cameras on. So you didn't know if they were a man or a woman. You didn't know if they had a physical disability or not. You start just looking at the work that gets done. So while COVID did cause a whole lot of damage, one of the things it really showed is that there's a lot of people out there with a great level of competence and ability. And just as important, or even more important, diversity isn't just a nice thing to do. It's not just an ethical, fairness, justice thing to do. It improves performance. The research supports this, and putting the right mix of people leads to far better decision making, problem solving, and implementation.